Hi everyone, I'm Alister Benn and you're watching Expressive Photography. I just got back from running two back-to-back workshops on the north coast of Spain, and when we run workshops we can't say, oh well, the weather doesn't look very good, we're not going to go out, or we get disappointed if the conditions aren't what we would hope for. And in this video and the next and the one after that, I want to cover seascape photography. Now, ever since we were kids, we've looked forward to going to the coast to have ice creams and cotton candy and fish and chips and all of those things that we look forward to, not to mention playing in the surf, playing in the waves, looking in rock pools, and generally having a good time. If my parents had told me that one of the conditions of me getting fed at night was to produce the best sandcastle, or to somehow come back with some incredible memory of that event that was going to be better than any other child's memory, I think I would have felt quite an awful lot of pressure. And that is why when we go to the coast to make photographs, having an open mind, an open heart, and being open to anything that may present itself to you is the guaranteed way to make sure that you're going to come back with something that you're going to feel proud of and it's going to be unique and personal to you. One of the great things about going to this coast is that there's not too many iconic locations. There's a couple that are, that there is a view that is really worth focusing on, but most of the time myself and the participants get to go to these places and explore and find the things that catch their eye, catch their imagination. So what I've done is I put together a series of 10 images to talk about today, and each of those demonstrate one facet or some of the facets of seascape photography that I particularly find passionate, or I am particularly passionate about. And it's this wonderful fusion of craft, technique, and art or creativity. I believe that we take our passion with us into the landscape. I believe that you can go to somewhere and if the weather is a bit off, then you can feel disheartened and a bit down. And that is guaranteed to lead you down a path of increasing disappointment and less satisfaction from your photography. Here at Expressive Photography, we believe very, very strongly in having fun. We believe very, very strongly in using photography not just to de-stress from our day-to-day lives, but also to help us to just improve everything, not just about our lives, but about our creative output and the way we express ourselves. So I've got here 10 different photographs. What I've done here is I have presented them to you as shot. So these aren't full frame, these are as shot. So I crop in camera, I add film simulations in camera, and what I've done here is basically produce 10 images as I took them in camera. They're not the JPEGs, they are the raw files, and I've done a little bit of work just to remove sensor spots, etc. But this is very much what I was looking at on the back of the camera when I was making my images. So each of these images was taken in pretty much weather that you would call not classic landscape photography weather. Yes, we were out in the mornings. Yes, we were out in the evenings. I think I haven't got past about day 3 of the workshop, the first workshop, by choosing the first 10 images. So I've obviously shot quite a lot. I think there was about 1,600 or so images from the 2 workshops back to back, representing over 3 weeks in the field. But obviously when you're shooting waves, you tend to shoot a lot. So the number of compositions was a lot less. So what I'm going to do is go through each one, discuss perhaps why I chose this. I'll show you the full frame as well. They're not worked. I've removed sensor spots, etc. But really, this just gives you an idea of the decisions that I made and why I made them. Now, this was on the very, very first morning. There was some gentle light in the sky, but I wanted to focus in on the geometric forms. I love rocks. I love the interaction between rocks and water. In this particular case, I've used a longer shutter speed, and as you can see from the video clip that accompanies this, the water's rolling and boiling around these rocks all the time. The long shutter speed allows me to isolate the geometry of the rocks, the geometry of the geology of the rocks, and focuses in on that. If we look at the full frame, I'll just kill that on the left-hand side there, you can see the choice of why I cropped it where I did. Maybe I would have moved it a fraction down. I'm always looking at the edges of my frames, and there was stuff up here in the full frame. So if I change this to original, you can see there's a bit of stuff up here that seems to take the energy out of the system. It tends to get in the way of some of this geology. The foreground felt a little bit heavy. So by isolating that central section, that slice, that X-pan wondrous slice that I like to use a lot of the time, it's allowed me to isolate the geometry that I liked. So if I go back to the as shot version, you can see that nice slice through the middle, and that's what I particularly liked. Shooting in the field the way I want to see something on the back of the camera is an important part of my enjoyment. Making a cropping decision is part of what I enjoy about photography in the field. It's the craft part of isolating exactly what it is that I like and eliminating everything that's not what I like. The old mantra that I've started to come up with now: point your camera at the cool and eliminate everything that's not cool. That is the simplest compositional guide I can ever think of to share with you. When it comes time to process these images, I'm open and happy to change these aspect ratios. So if I wanted to go to a 16:9 and add a little bit more of that top and bottom, I don't think that would be a major problem. Also having quite a few megapixels to play with here. This is shot on my Fujifilm GFX 100S, which has a rather large number of pixels to play with. I could do something like that, go to 16:9, add a little bit more content, add a little bit more space. What is that achieving? Adding space up here on the left-hand side is creating more atmosphere and giving the content a little bit more room to breathe. All of these decisions can be either in the field compositionally or after the effect when we want to start sharing the images with other people. For this though, I am just going to go back to my original of as shot and say I'm happy with the decision that I made. The key thing with landscape photography by the coast, or seascapes as we call it, is the choice of shutter speed. In this particular case, I did a 25-second exposure, and I know for a fact that I used my case 10-stop ND filter and the case circular polarizer. Both of those things allow me to shape the light. The circular polarizer, as you rotate it, you can see the way the amount of reflection comes and goes or changes on different surfaces. And I think that's a fundamental part of shaping the light in the field. And of course, the 10-stop ND filter allowed me to make this long exposure to create a much more calm composition. This beach that we were at is quite interesting really, because it's a big surf beach. There's an awful lot of surfers camp in the car park, and they tend to wander around the beach first thing in the morning as they want to go and catch some waves. And finding cool little flows. And as the tide was receding, we get these wonderful situations where the sand is being eroded by the water as it flows through the frame. And I really like scenes like this. I think there's a sort of directionality of the flow. It's talking about impermanence. Anyone who watches this channel knows that I'm an emotional person who likes to use metaphor in my photography. And I love that idea of water flowing through and eroding and changing, and the way the sand can flow through the frame as well. Again, if we go back to the original frame here, we can see we have quite a lot of quite interesting content here. And in this particular case, I prefer the full frame. I think the slice was too dramatic. It took out quite a lot of things in the frame that I think are adding value. So in this particular case, Even though I made a 65 by 24 panorama in camera, I'm totally happy to come back to a full frame and use all those megapixels that I have available to me. You can see though that there are a number of sensor spots on this, and that would drive me absolutely bananas. So obviously I will go through before processing this finally and get rid of those and tidy them up a little bit. But one of the things I want to highlight in this particular image is the hierarchy of luminosity. These little bright spots here allow us to follow that through the frame, and I think it's quite a joyful little scene. We certainly don't need to photograph the ocean, and we certainly don't need to photograph the sky, as this shot demonstrates. At Expressive Photography, we talk about the 5 triggers: luminosity, contrast, color, atmosphere, geometry. If you haven't read about the 5 triggers, check out one of my ebooks where I talk about these various things in the landscape that are going to catch your eye every single time. I know why I look at things. In this particular case, the difference between the colored bands of rock, the cool and the warm, the light and the dark, the geometric forms. This was quite tricky in camera, and this is actually 4x5. And the reason I cropped 4x5 is you can see that bottom corner there. It bothered me a little in the field, but every time I tried to eliminate it, I would introduce something at the top of the frame. If I was to stop worrying about that, then the full frame, which is 4x3, I think works just as well. I may end up having to come in here and do something with that contrast in there. However, yes, it does bother me. It's quite bizarre. I am a man who lives with my creativity on my sleeve, and if something bothers me, it really does bother me, and therefore my gut is telling me that there's something about that that's not right. This still bothers me, this left hand side there. So there is going to be a little bit of fine tuning to find the crop in there to eliminate some of those problems that are going to make the image feel like it sits in the frame. This idea of sitting in the frame, I think, is a really valuable one. The content should feel as if it belongs there, and that there's nothing in there that's pulling your attention away from the main content. I really do like these scenes though, and as you can see, I haven't made any adjustments at all, but as soon as I start to add contrast to this scene, very quickly those colors are going to get really rich, and we can see the beautiful geology on display. So again, on days that are overcast, on days that are cloudy, on days where it's raining even, photographing the rocks and geology of a beach is always a great idea. We were somewhat fortunate and unfortunate with fog on the first couple of days. There was a massive fog bank sitting off the Bay of Biscay, off that north coast, and on a couple of occasions it came right in and enveloped the coast. The night before this, we didn't actually manage to shoot. The fog was just too dense and we really couldn't photograph anything. However, the next morning, the fog kind of played with these sea stacks. Anyone who follows me on social media has seen this sea stack in various shapes and forms over the last week or so as I've been posting some images. But at the end of the day, it just felt a bit incongruous with all this fog around the ocean sea stacks. Using a circular polarizer helps to create a little bit more contrast, particularly in these blues here, and my case filters. I use them all the time, and using either a CPL or one of the ND filters generally to shape light and to manage time. Of course, with this, I'm not slowing down the shutter speed. You can see here the detail underneath the sea stacks. However, I'm still using the polarizer. Now, this one, you'll see the full frame. It's quite a weird scene, you know, the beach and the back of the beach. We're looking across a short little cove here. And I just loved the way the spray was catching this, the backwash, the backlight. And I think the slice here works pretty well. I'm happy with that because I wanted to just isolate the spray against the rocks. faster shutter speed to create a bit of movement. We're looking at 1/4 of a second here at f10 using my 200mm, 100 to 200mm on my GFX 100S. And that 1/4 of a second is just long enough to allow some movement in the spray and just really catching the light the way it's shining backlit here. So I really quite like this one. I think it's quite a cool little scene. Anything that's cool that we find at the beach is worth pointing our cameras at, just the same way as when we were kids. Anything we find on the beach can be cool to explore and find, whether it's a jellyfish that's been washed up or a crab, or looking at the birds that are feeding on the rock pools. All of those things are fair game in terms of things that we find interesting. Same location, totally different idea. So this is literally the same scene or same part of the scene, and I really like this choice of shutter speed. This is a 0.5 of a second, so half a second, and time is critical with seascape photography. The shutter speed and when we choose to push the shutter button is the most important thing. I was using a little Fuji app that connects to my camera with Bluetooth, so I was able to fire the shutter just at that right moment, just as the water's starting to fall back off the rocks, to get that really cool flow. So passion, engagement, excitement, being in the landscape, full of anticipation of cool things that we're going to find when we're there, in conjunction with time in terms of the shutter speed and timing when to hit the shutter. Again, not dramatic light. The whole scene was in shade. There was not a cloud in the sky, but there are things to photograph 100%. Again, if I look at the full frame here, the full frame in its own right may well be okay. There's some interesting transitions there. We're seeing a lot more of this flow in the foreground, and I think I may well process this one finally as a full frame scene. I shoot panos because they look cool and they make me feel great when I'm in the field, and there's no reason not to. However, because I'm not cropping the pixels away, I do have that content at my disposal. I really like this scene, actually. I think I was using my 3-stop combined polarizer and 3-stop filter, the sandwich filter as I call them, that Case have just released. And I am super happy with this one. I may create a bit more contrast, just pull in those blacks a little bit and open up the whites even a touch more, and I'll probably add some clarity to the top. Of course, geology is always going to tick boxes for me, particularly in harsh light. If you can find an area of great geology that's tucked in a shadowy corner somewhere, then you can certainly find beautiful patterns and flow. With the 5 triggers, it doesn't matter what the subject is. It can be a human form, it can be architecture, it can be macro, it can be seascape photography, it can be forest photography, it can be any type of photography. The 5 triggers are going to excite us in the same way. Here we have great geometry, we have beautiful contrast, we have some lovely colors. All of those things are talking engagement to me. And at the end of the day, we can play around with saturation, we can play around with contrast, and all of those things are going to change the feel. As soon as I remove some of that color, the geometry and the luminosity become more important. Every slider we move in whichever software we choose to process our images in changes the feel of the photograph. Every time we sit down in front of the computer, we can change our relationship with our raw files. Photography is great. I love it. Another great example of time, where the water rushing away from me and kind of the way it's interacting with the coast here creates this really beautiful flow. I really quite like this scene. It's a place I've been to many, many times. I used to live around the corner from this beach, so I used to go to it a lot. But one of the things I'm noticing in this particular image is there's quite a strange it's almost like really hard to find the white balance that's going to suit this scene, in which case I think I might just go into black and white and just use something like a yellow filter because the rocks are quite yellowy. And again, just play around with the luminosity and maybe crop down a fraction from this side. And instantly we have a very, very different scene on our hands. Taking away the color has such a strong impact on how we read these scenes. This is definitely not quite as optimistic and happy as the color version was, and it shows the flow of that water really, really nicely. Landscape photography gives us a huge opportunity to express ourselves, and making these creative decisions either in the field with the choice of shutter speed, with the types of composition, with the aspect ratios we do, and then later when it comes to processing, how we crop further, how we process to change, enhance colors, contrast, luminosity, all of these things, every single choice we have is a massive opportunity to express ourselves. Yeah, we're very fortunate. This one was really, really cool. Some fog came in as the morning progressed. It was really, really amazing. And I really like this composition. Now, a lot of people are going to look at this big round foreground rock and think that is too dominant, but I kind of like it. So be prepared to try something different. Be prepared to challenge the norm. Be prepared to push boundaries. All of those things. The seascape environment is all about the transition between something hard and immovable and something flexible, fluid, and atmospheric. That is what seascape photography is all about. Here is the classic metaphor of rigid thinking versus fluid, expressive, energetic thinking. Everything is possible. Nothing is impossible. You can do what you want. You can express yourself how you want. Be free is my advice to you. Anyone who's made it this far in the video, I congratulate you for sticking with this, because I know that I do have this tendency to go down little side streets, but that's because I'm passionate about what I talk about. I really like this composition. I know it feels odd, but I really love it. And when you're there for a sunrise shoot, if you don't get a sunrise light, because it was basically blue sky and then the fog came in, these beautiful warm rocks are the sunrise. They're adding the energy that warm light adds to a scene, and the contrast between the cool water and the warm rocks. And I haven't processed this at all. I mean, if I add a little bit of vibrance just to give it a touch more pop, add a little bit of magenta to take away some of the green tint, very, very quickly we're going to end up with a scene that's really quite expressive. Finally, and I've talked about this a little bit in the past, which is when you have blue skies at sunrise, the light is going to bounce off things. And because all this rock was quite golden in color, it picked up the morning light really, really well. And I was just fascinated with the reflections in this scene. And again, adding energy to this environment. And I just want to check, the only issue I ever felt with this was the color in the water, because it's reflective light. So I want to just go into the color mixer and just pull back the blue saturation a touch, just to keep the neutral, a little bit of neutrality in the water. That's basically just reflecting the blue sky that's above the rocks behind me. And there we go. I'm happy enough with that. But the reflected light bouncing off those warm rocks into the surface of the water here. And I did try various aspect ratios around here. This is the full frame. Pulling it down a bit seems to work maybe a little fraction better, getting rid of a little bit of that hard rockiness and allowing the foreground to just exist. But when you zoom in, the details and textures in this foreground are just, I was captivated with this. I stood here for half an hour just looking at it, and it was only the tide coming in that was kind of eroding the opportunity to shoot it. So there we have it, part one of my seascape photography series. In the second part, I have a conversation with Rachel Talabart, who's probably one of the most well-known and accomplished seascape photographers working at the moment. Her work is incredible, and I had her on a Zoom session last week where we talked about her new book. We talked about her passion for seascape photography. So a week today, we'll be posting my interview with Rachel Talabart, and then the week after that, the Tuesday following, we'll have a second part of this where we look at an entirely different set of circumstances, entirely different weather conditions, an entirely different set of challenges, and how that changes the types of photographs that we make given an entirely different palette. Thank you very much for getting this far. It's been quite an effort for you to get this far in the video, so I really, really appreciate it. Dive into the comments and tell me, your relationship with seascape photography. What is it that you love about seascapes? Please hit the subscribe button, give me an old thumbs up. That's all great for the channel. And I look forward to sharing Rachel Talabart with you next week, and then part 2 of this seascape series the week after that. Cheers, everyone. Take care. Have a great time wherever you are. Bye for now.